Hello, welcome to ATI 4448. In this session, we are going to address project risk management. What's risk? Risk is the undesirable situation or circumstances which has both a probability of occurrence and a potential consequence to program success. Risks are normally associated with uncertainties. Since we have the undesirable event or situation and we would like to control it, then we need to manage that. And that's what we called risk management, which is an organized, systematic decision-making process that will efficiently identify the risks, assess them, analyze them, and effectively reduce or eliminate these risks to achieve project goals. If we look at the graph, we know that the risk will be higher at the beginning of the project because there are lots of uncertainties. I don't know what's going on at the beginning of the project, and by the progress of the project execution and project timeline, we can see that the risk will start to decrease and we don't have any problem. By the end, we shouldn't have any problem by the execution of the project or by ending the project. But if we look at the cost associated with the risk, at the beginning, if the customer decided from the first week to make some changes in the scope or to make some changes in the schedule, the material, anything that's needed, the cost will be low because at that point we did not even purchase, buy the material, or we didn't start. That's why we have the chance to make the proper changes with the lowest cost. But that cost will start to increase as the project progress. By the end or towards the end, or let's say towards 2/3 or more than a half, a little bit, it will be more cost associated with the risk, although it's getting lower and lower. But now if I need to make any changes, that will cost a lot of money. So any changes in the program after 50%, 60% of the execution of it, it will be with high cost. This is the relation between the cost and the risk as we advance through project execution. What are the processes of project risk management? First of all, we need to plan and understand or define how to conduct the risk management activities. What are we going to do to address risk in the project? And this is called risk management planning. From the planning, we need to go to the second process, which is risk identification. That means analyzing the project activities to identify the different sources of risk. We are looking at the different activities. We are looking at the material availability and resource availability. And from there, we can identify the risk associated with the project or project activities. Then we start analyzing the risk. We start with qualitative analysis, then quantitative analysis, where we identify risk priority for further analysis, the impact of that risk, the probability of occurrence, and the statistical analysis and graphs related to the risk that will show me that impact or show me what would it do to my project. Then I need to develop a response plan, which and those are the options and actions to reduce possible risk impact. During all that, I will be monitoring and controlling the implementation of the risk, the analysis of the risk, identifying the risk, um, and if a new risk will occur, then what plan should I do? What strategy should I follow? Evaluate and see if the process that I implemented is effective in addressing the risk or not. All this will be going through the whole process of risk management. So I should monitor and control the risk management process from A to Z, or from one phase one or process one all the way until the last process. The first process is risk management planning. So what is risk management planning? It is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. It should be developed during the initial project phase and immediately implemented as soon as we start the project. The plan should be reviewed and revised as needed during each project, with the new risk coming, with new situations, new circumstances coming, all that affect the project, whatever affects the project and make an uncertain event or unusual event, then we have to address that. We have to uh, re-plan for managing that risk and response properly. The inputs needed for the risk management planning: we need the enterprise environmental factors, we need the organizational process assets, what kind of assets and resources do we have in the organization. We need the project scope statement, and that's the first thing that will define the project goals, objectives, and the success factors and the uncertainty. And remember, in the scope stage, we identify higher risk or uncertainty items. In this process, you will see more details on these issues. The tools and techniques that can be followed to plan for the risk management is the meetings, where actually brainstorm between project manager, the team members, stakeholders, and they will create a high-level plans for conducting risk management activities. We are hoping that by the end of the planning sessions, the meetings that we do with the customers and the stakeholders, that we will have a methodology on how to approach risk, how to manage risk, and the roles and responsibilities for each one in the team on what to do when that risk happens. Then the budget that's needed if that risk happen, the time to response for the risk, mitigate or solve it, risk categories, the different risk categories that will be there, the definition of that impact that will be on the project, the probability and impact matrix that will show us the risk, the impact, and the response for that risk. Then stakeholders tolerance, and we have to decide at the beginning for a reporting format, what kind of format should we report the risk in. And I will show you one of the type of formats that's usually being done with the government or between companies. And the tracking. The second process is risk identification, which is the process of determining which risk may affect the project and documenting their characteristics. In this process, actually, we are investigating what could go wrong in the project. The risk identification will generate a list of all possible risks that could affect the project by the brainstorming among the team member and the stakeholders and the project manager. The focus on risk events rather than risk consequences. For example, instrument does not return correct data. That's a consequence of events like poor circuit design or incorrect or failed component, poor software implementation. So we have to look at the risk events, not the risk consequences. We should focus on overall project risks, then identify specific risks. Usually, we use the work breakdown structure to help organize the risk identification process, where we relate the risk to a certain activity or one of the activities that will be within the work breakdown structure and might affect project execution. Then we seek an input from sources outside the group, maybe a consultant, maybe another company or a third party or one of the stakeholders. So always we try to seek input from sources outside the group. The inputs needed for risk identification, we need the environmental factors within the company, we need the assets and resources that the organization have, the scope statement, the management plan, risk management plan that we developed in the first process or the first stage, and the project management overall plan. The tools and techniques that can be used to identify the risk is the documentation review. If we have documentation within the project or that's been developed, we can review the documentation. If we have some information that's been provided by the customer, then we can review the information being provided. Otherwise, we can gather the information and look at the different data and analyze it. Then we have a checklist that will go through the different activities, the problems that might happen, and that will be a checklist to identify the different risks associated with each activity. An assumption analysis, we made some assumptions. Some of the those assumptions will create a risk. Then we can analyze them and identify which one will create for us a risk. Other tools and techniques could be more representation using diagramming or graphing, such as the cause and effect diagrams, flow charting, or influence diagrams. And not to forget also that we can do SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, where will show me the different weaknesses and different opportunities and threats within a certain project or within the activities of a certain project. The outputs, once I identify the risk, is a risk register, which will include a list of identified risks and list of potential responses. The third process, which actually is broken into two individual processes within it, it's called the assessment or risk analysis. And the risk analysis could be either qualitative risk analysis or quantitative. So we can do both, or it's better actually to do both analysis, the qualitative then the quantitative risk analysis. The risk analysis assessment is divided into those two, and the qualitative means the process of prioritizing risks for further analysis or actions by assessing and combining their probability of occurrence and impact while the quantitative is the process of numerically analyzing the effect of identified risks on overall project activities. The inputs needed for the qualitative risk analysis is the organizational assets, the scope statement, management plan, and risk register, which is the identified risks that we did in the previous stage. The different techniques for the qualitative risk analysis, we have risk probability and impact assessment, which will identify the probability of a risk to happen, uh, uh, and the impact for a potential effect on a project objective. Then we have the probability and impact matrix, which is used to prioritize risk for further quantitative analysis and response based on their ranking. And we have the risk data quality assurance or assessment, which will make sure of the accuracy and credibility of the data that's being used in the qualitative analysis. The other tools and techniques can be risk categorization, risk urgency assessment, and expert judgment. We need to categorize the different risks that we gathered and we identified. We need to rank them based on their urgency and the immediate response for them. How fast do I need to respond to them before it gets out of hand? In addition, we could use an expert judgment to identify the different risks, assess them, and identify the probability and impact of each risk on the overall project execution and the execution of the different activities within a project. To assess risk impact, we need to use a scenario analysis approach, which will determine all the consequences and their severity if the event happens, and it will identify when during the project will the event likely to happen, and then it will estimate the probability that the risk event will occur and determine how difficult it will be to detect the event occurrence. To rank the risk and its importance, we need to use the probability and impact matrix, which actually can help in the prioritization of the risk. It will identify the event probability versus the consequence or impact. As you can see in the matrix, it's divided into 3 zones: red zone, yellow zone, and the green zone. The green zone means the event probability can be safely ignored and it will not affect the project execution, while in the yellow zone it needs to be monitored closely so it will not get out of hand and move to the red zone. The red zone, it's very important and it needs an immediate response. To determine the likelihood and consequence, we can look at the different consequences and the likelihood. Since we have numbers from 1 to 5, and we need to understand what does it mean and how can I choose one of these squares within the matrix between 1 and 5 in both sides, then I need to understand what each number represents. So for the likelihood, 1 means it's not likely to happen, 2 low likelihood, 3 it's likely to happen, 4 high likely to happen, 5 is near certain to happen. For the consequences or impact, Also, we have 5 levels. 1 means minimal impact. 2 means minor, whether on the technical or on schedule or in cost, and it will be within a certain range. For 3, it's moderate. For 4, it's major. For 5, cannot meet the key performance parameters or schedule or cost, and that's a problem. 5 means it's very high and needs an immediate response or needs some kind of attention, and if you are in the 5 zone, then you are in a dangerous situation. And you can use this, like we said, it depends on the company, but you can use this template to report risk in your company or your organization. Like I said before, one of the things that you plan for at the beginning is how to report risk to management or to customer. And this is one of the templates that you can use to present or report risk to upper management or to the customer. So you can use this template for your project. You can use the interpretation from for the 1 to 5 range that we did for the likelihood and impact, and try to see if you have any actually risk or uncertainty in your project and project activities. The outputs that will be expected from the qualitative risk analysis will be the risk register update. Now we have updating, or we have updates for the identified risk, the relative ranking or priority list of project risks, the group by category, causes of risk, list of risk requiring response in near time, list of risks for additional analysis and response, watch list for low priority risk, and trends in qualitative risk analysis results. For the quantitative, we take all what we did from the qualitative analysis. We take the schedule management plan, the cost management plan, and the scope of that project with the assets that's available in the company, and we start quantitative analysis or numerical analysis for those information or for the data. The techniques that can be used to do that, either we do data gathering and start representing that in distribution. So we can do the data gathering with the historical information that they have in the company, the organization, project, previous project, or we can do it through interviewing customers and stakeholders to get the information needed. Once we have that, then we start probability analysis, and we get the proper distribution that will fit these data. Another approach is to do modeling techniques, which will do sensitivity analysis for the data that's being gathered. We can use the expected monetary value analysis, and we can do modeling and simulation for the different scenarios that might happen, and for each scenario we'll have an output, and we look at the different mitigations that can be done for the risk. At least at that point we will know the type of risk, the category of risk, and how bad the impact will be on the project. In addition, we can use expert judgment, where we can ask the expert on if they did statistical analysis before for a certain project and project activities, we can ask them about the consequences and the impact that might happen to a project if that risk or that uncertainty happened. The outputs that we expect from the quantitative risk analysis, we will have risk register update, a new list of identified risks, categorized and prioritized, so we know which one is important, which one need to be monitored closely or responded to right away. After identifying the risk, knowing what kind of risk do we have, and categorizing the priority importance of that risk, now we need to develop a response plan. How are we going to respond to those risks? So we need to develop the plan. This process is the process of developing options and actions to enhance opportunities and reduce threats to project activities, which is actually we are asking what must be done to eliminate or reduce the risk. We are trying to find the solution for these risks. In the development, the plan should identify the primary components necessary for managing the risk. What response strategy will be used? How will the risk event be detected and the response triggered? What plan will be put in place in response to the event, and who will be responsible for monitoring and controlling that risk? The inputs needed is the project management plan and the list of identified risks. The tools and techniques that can be used is to select a strategy or mix of strategies that most likely to be effective for addressing a certain risk. And we have strategies for negative risk or threat, and we have strategies for positive risks or opportunities. In addition, we should have contingent response strategies. For the negative risks and threats, we can avoid the risk, we can accept the risk, mitigate, or transfer. For positive risk, we can exploit, we can share, enhance, or accept. Also, we can use another tools or techniques, which is expert judgment. And that's the input from a knowledgeable person to the actions to be taken on a specific defined risk. And usually, the expert will have experience from previous projects. They face the same problems and they used certain solution for it, and it works, or it worked at that point. Since it does work, then it can be implemented in this case. So all what we ask is for their experience, their judgment on how to address this risk, and they will tell us what to do. For the negative risk response strategies, avoiding the risk. What does it mean avoiding the risk? Means maybe changing project management plan to eliminate the threats entirely, or maybe isolate project objectives from risks impact. Actually, we can avoid the risk by just asking for more clarification for the requirement, maybe obtaining more information from the customer, improving the communication between the customer stakeholders, the team members, the management team, and the project manager, or acquiring extra expertise to address the different issues. Also, we can change the objective in jeopardy, for example, reducing the scope or changing the methodology of execution. If I promised more that I can do, then I can reduce the scope and promise less than that. just to avoid the risk that might happen with having a bigger scope. If worse comes to worse, we can avoid risk by shutting down the project, which is not good. Shutting down the project. Usually that happens in huge projects like a dam project or a bridge project. And if they have a bridge in a certain location, they would like to build that bridge, and they found that there is a sinkhole or lots of water under that bridge that will make it collapse after a while, then that's a huge risk that should be addressed right away by aborting the execution of the project. We can accept risk and not to change project management plan and deal with risk as they occur. Usually, we are unable to identify the proper response strategy. Project team will deal with the risk as they come through when it comes through the execution of the project. The third option is strategy is to mitigate the risk, which is actions that are taken during the project to either reduce the likelihood of risk or reduce the impact of the risk. For example, testing electronic component after receiving it would reduce the likelihood that bad part would be used in the circuit. We can also hire someone from outside to deal with the risk based on their expertise. It's a third-party good company that they dealt with this risk before and they know how to do it or how to address it. Then we can transfer the risk to that third party or that company, and they will take care of this problem or this risk. For the positive risk response, the different strategies we can exploit, we can share risk, we can enhance, and we can accept. Exploit means eliminating the uncertainty associated with the particular upside risk by ensuring the opportunity definitely will happen. For example, assigning the most skilled and experienced people to the project. You don't need any risk that will hold back on using these skillful people to execute the project. Sharing risk, multiple units associated with the project assume some portion of the risk. The risk can be separated over different units. Enhance, and in this strategy it's used to increase the probability and the positive impact of an opportunity by identifying and maximizing the key drivers of these positive impact risks to increase the probability of their occurrence. For example, adding more resources to an activity to finish early. Accepting in this case is taking advantage of the opportunity if it comes along, but not actively pursuing it. And we said that always we have to have contingency plan that will address the risk that we will find through project execution. But we have different areas that can be hit, either technical area or schedule or cost. If it was in the technical area, then it can be mitigated by building and testing prototypes of critical components, or maybe have available backup or alternate designs that have much lower risk. For the schedule, manage the slack time to provide resources for delayed component, or maybe bring more resources to address that area. But we have to be careful with adding more resources because that will increase the cost and might reduce the performance. In the cost area, time and cost are related, so trade-offs of schedule delays with lower cost, it will be a must. One of the options is to descope the project, which will be very hard, and rescope it with the new components. So we can remove components from that project and build the scope again. The cost associated with that will be a lot after 50% of the project. Before that, it will be um, uh, maybe acceptable. Um, most of the companies now, what they do, they have something called reserve percentage, whether with the schedule, the cost, or the manpower. They have a percentage reserve that can be used when they observe risk or identify risk during the execution of a project. What are the risk response planning outputs? The outputs will be risk register update. Again, we updated the list of identified risks with the responses, project management plan updates, and then risk-related contractual agreement. If we have someone that we need to hire from outside, then we have a new contract to hire a third party to transfer or send the risk to solve. The last process is the monitoring and control process. Actually, we cannot say that this is the last process in this risk management plan or project risk management, because actually the monitoring and control will start from the beginning of defining the plan of the risk management. So it's a process of implementing risk response plans, tracking identified risk, monitoring residual risk, identifying new risks, and evaluating risk processes effectiveness throughout the project execution or the project life cycle. During that, we will have continuous monitoring for risk, and we will have triggers that will alert the project manager on the risk before it happens, so the response can be deployed or implemented in the right time. Each risk is assigned to a specific person that has expertise and authority to identify a response to an event, and then problems should be immediately reported, embraced, and solved as they come or before they come. Changes in any aspect of the project need to be documented and communicated to stakeholders, project management, and other team members. In this communication, the one who will be authorized to approve the change should be identified. They should use written form to attract hardware, software, and document changes, and they should notify of everybody of the changes that will happen. The inputs needed to monitor and control: we need the project management plan, we need the list of identified risks, the approved changes, work performance information, and performance reports. The tools and techniques: we can keep on reassessing the activities during the execution of the risk management plan. We need to audit the different strategies and responses that been implemented. Did it work? Are we dealing with the problem? What happened? In which stage are we in? And did we find or identify other risks after that? We should look also at the variance and trend analysis during the response for the risk and the assessment and the execution. We should look at reserve analysis. Did it work? Having more time, more money, more resources, or um, uh, what should I do? How much people should I use next time? How much money should I put aside for next time if the problem came? So I need to analyze the reserve that's been assigned for such a problem. And of course, status meeting that will keep everybody updated with the risks and the responses and strategies for these risks. The outputs will be an update for the list of identified risks, requested changes, recommended corrective actions and preventive actions, organization and process assets update, the project management plan update, and project document update. That will be all for the risk and risk management. If you have any questions, please email it to me through Florida Online. Thank you.